A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a Star Wars Books podcast. I'm your host, Meg Dowell, and this show is going to be lit? Is that outdated internet slang? I don't care. I am so excited to bring you the premiere episode of my brand new podcast. A week early because, as I'll explain in a minute, I already had the audio and I really wanted to give you the chance to hear it. But first, let's all wish a happy book birthday to Kirsten White's Padawan, which is out today. A spoiler-free review will be dropping in this feed very soon. But for now, it's a new Star Wars book day, and I almost forgot to mention it, so yay books. What you're about to hear is an absolutely delightful conversation I had recently with Roseanne A. Brown, who you might know from her previous novels, A Song of Wraiths and Rain, and A Psalm of Storms and Silence. But most recently, she contributed a short story to the anthology Star Wars Stories of Jedi and Sith, which came out this past June. Through the Turbulence is a Rey and Poe story, set between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. And it focuses on Rey as she wrestles with the Force and what it means to feel connected to it. I originally conducted this interview for an online feature, but with permission from Roseanne and her team, I'm sharing the full audio conversation with all of you today. Just not the part where we curse AirPods for never working when you need them to. Enjoy! First of all, I'm so glad that we were able to set this up. I am very excited. I was so delighted to get to the end of Stories of Jedi and Sith and find your story there, because I've read many things from you, and it's so good to have you in Star Wars.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here. Like sometimes I still pinch myself, like they let me write Star Wars. Like who allowed this? What?
it turned out so well. So yeah, you had the pleasure of getting to write a Rey-focused story, and I know you love Rey as a character. So I wanted to talk more about that. Basically, what was it like getting to tell a Star Wars story from the point of view of Rey? Because there aren't so many of them at the moment.
Definitely. Okay, so to answer that question, I kind of gotta go back to last year when I was first
Do it.
invited to the anthology by the editor Jennifer Heddle. And they asked all the contributors, like, can you list 3 people who you'd like to write for the anthology, right? Just so we don't have too much overlap or any overlap, actually. And I'll be completely honest, I asked for Obi-Wan Kenobi first, but he was already taken.
No.
Like, who does not love Obi-Wan? But
Exactly.
second on the list was Rey. And I think like what just drew me to Rey, so I'm kind of a latecomer to Star Wars. Like there's some people I know who have like grown up from it, like their parents were Star Wars fans, like as children they were Star Wars, but I didn't get until high school when a friend learned I hadn't watched any of them, and so made me watch at the time all 6 movies. And I became obsessed. But I bring that up because so my first sort of Star Wars movie where I was present and aware and like into it was The Force Awakens. Because I remember when like the prequels were coming out, I was a young child at the time, but like I wasn't too like I didn't really know what was going on. But Force Awakens was my first time like being into Star Wars or releases coming out, like engaging with the fandom in real time. And so that movie has a very special place in my heart. And with Rey, I latched onto her so quickly, like at this newcomer into this like big sprawling world, and this idea of like finding your place and like understanding where you fit within this giant puzzle was just something I related to so deeply. And so getting to explore that with her and write that with her, it was so much fun.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to me like how different people come into discovering, not just discovering Star Wars, but kind of like really getting into it for themselves. Because like I was a prequel kid. They came out when I was a child, and my dad's a huge Star Wars fan, so we watched the movies all the time, but like I didn't really get it until like much later. And then finally, like I think for me it was a Revenge of the Sith. I finally watched that like on my own, and I was like, oh, I get it now. Like this can be my thing. Yeah, and all of us have that character that we kind of latch on to, and we're like, I get you. I see myself in Star Wars in a way, and that's just super important for everyone to be able to have that character that they can kind of connect to like that.
Exactly, like this idea that the galaxy can be so infinite, but at the same time, it can also be just so like human. And like I think that's what keeps drawing people to Star Wars, like that connection within this epic story.
Exactly. What was it about Rey that really just drew you in?
I think about Rey, specifically within The Force Awakens, it was this idea of this girl, right? And who is, so I'm trying to figure out like how I want to put my words in order here. This idea of this like girl who is at the center of this like huge, big battle, like this thing that's been going on for at this point now 2 generations before her. And yet what she wanted was just so human, like her feelings of sort of abandonment and that like difficulty sort of connecting with other people. And like how when Rey is getting involved with like resistance and Poe and Finn and Leia and all that, like she's not in this to like save the world, or she's not in this to like fix the Jedi or anything. Like at first, it's just that feeling of sort of wanting and that belonging. Especially when I was a teenager, like when I look back on what was sort of driving me, and it was that feeling of like not knowing where your place was and trying desperately to find it. And as we see her grow, we sort of see her priorities shift and grow and become more sort of the quote unquote typical heroic like traits and driving forces we're used to seeing in our main characters. But for me, that was something sort of so special, especially getting to see a female character having this. I don't want to call her necessarily selfish, but less like a noble, like, oh, I'm in this to save the world, save the princess type of thing, and just kind of like just sort of trying to get by. And
Yeah.
then finding herself in this great big battle and trying to realize like I can't just be a bystander. I have to kind of pick my side and pick what I'm gonna do.
Right. One thing I really loved about your story in this anthology is it really like takes Rey, from what we know of her already and kind of takes her back to another moment of like kind of questioning what she's doing and what her relationship to the Force is. And it's kind of like really that journey of you can move forward, but sometimes you're going to move back a little bit. And then, you have to keep going and keep like reminding yourself why you're there and why you're doing what you're doing.
Yes, yes, that was so important to me to get to write, because so after we picked the characters, we were trying to figure out exactly, and I was pitching exactly what the story would be. I remember I just kept thinking, I'm like, what is there to sort of explore here with this character? What haven't we seen yet? And I
Right.
think one thing that has always fascinated me, and not just with Star Wars, but like with media in general, is sort of the way sort of trauma impacts fiction. And I
Yes.
remember one thing that first time I watched Star Wars that always sort of bothered me, and I know this has been dealt with in later works, but sort of within the original movies, was how after Alderaan is blown up, we never really see Leia truly react to that.
Right.
And I remember the first time I watched that, like we see her like comforting Luke after Obi-Wan has died. I'm just like, hang on, like yes, like Obi-Wan, like Luke lost Obi-Wan, that was a big deal, but like you just lost your entire planet, not just your family, like an entire way of being, billions of people, like species all gone. And like, where was
Right.
sort of the introspection of that? Where was that, the effect that would have on you? And like, I want to put credit where credit is due. There are amazing work being done in like the wider canon that has addressed that. So many wonderful things focused on Leia,
Hmm.
but that was one thing that stuck out to me. And so when I was looking at Rey and sort of looking, we focused in on that period right after Last Jedi, but before Rise of Skywalker.
Hmm.
And we remember looking there, like at this point, like Rey's life has changed pretty drastically in a very short amount of time. And when we see her again in Rise of Skywalker, we've seen her that she's come to a place she's kind of made peace with certain things we're told in the earlier movies. But I really, as a storyteller, I was like, okay, but what was the process there? Like we're being told this process happened. I want kind of to dig into like what would that actually look like to coming to terms with a lot of things you thought you knew about the world weren't true, or about yourself weren't true, or like in the case of like what happened with Luke, like having wanted something so long, wanting that mentor figure, and then losing them so quickly. Like, what does that do to a person?
Right. And that's such a huge benefit of having these stories like in between the movies or in addition to the movies is movies have this certain time frame that they have to tell an entire story in. And like we have these books and these stories and these anthologies where you can explore further, in between or a completely new story. What is this character feeling? What are they actually going through? And you can dive deeper into their perspective, their feelings. And I've just always appreciated that so much. I'm so glad that you got to do that with Rey and to really get to explore her mindset kind of in this in between time more. It was super important.
Thank you. Yeah, because I knew from the start, like, and I love lightsaber battles. Do not get me wrong. I love me a good action scene, but I just kind of knew from the start. I'm like, that's not quite like what I want to tell with this character. And
Right.
so it felt a bit of a risk at the time. I remember being like, are you sure? Like, this is more of an introspective story. Like, it's going to fit with the anthology. But no, Jen and the team were like so great about being like, no, this fits. This is like, this has a place here. And so I'm so grateful I was able to do something a little less like sort of the pew pew lightsaber blasters that people might have
Right.
expected.
Right. It's good to have all kinds of these stories. You can have the pew pew, and then you can have the deeper, more feel good feeling stories.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you have written many stories outside of Star Wars, all of them so great. And now you finally have gotten to join the growing family of people who get to write official Star Wars things. How has that been? What has that been like for you?
It has been like overwhelming, but in a good way.
Yeah.
Because I was at Star Wars Celebration back in May, and that was my first. I've done like a couple small school visits and things, but because my debut novel, A Song of Wraiths and Ruin, and its
Hmm.
sequel, A Psalm of Storms and Silence, they came out during the pandemic. I had
Mm-hmm.
never done any in-person events for those books, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a whole series I released under pandemic conditions. And so when I got the invite to Celebration, I was like, oh, okay, like sure, celebrate. Like I'd never attended Celebration as just a fan as well. So like I knew it was like the biggest Star Wars like show or convention, but like I don't think the full scale of it hit me until I was there, and I was like, oh, this is big. Because it's like with Star Wars, it's like it's one thing to know like yes, it's one of these enduring legacies. It's one of these franchises that means so much to so many people, but there's just something about seeing the like thousands and thousands of people and screaming as like the actors came on stage or like in the artist alley. I think that was the one that hit me like, oh wow, I'm part of something that's like really, really huge. And I'm so grateful because E.K. Johnston, the author of the Ahsoka novels, she
Hmm.
really took me under her wing and she was just like, nah, this is, I'm going to show you how you manage like Star Wars. And I'm so grateful to her because I'm not sure I would have survived those days without her guidance.
You really don't realize like how many Star Wars fans and creators there actually are until you're all in like one convention center and you're like, I there's so many people here. I don't know what to do.
I know, right? And that's just the people who can like afford or have access to celebration.
Right.
Like just and with online, like it's people are very vocal online, but there's still almost a level of detachment. But when you see them all, you're like, oh wow! Like I think our signing for the anthology, they said that they had allotted for like 200 people in the line, and we ended up going over by like close to an hour. So and that was just for the one anthology. So it was just blowing my mind.
Oh my goodness, that's so many people.
Mm-hmm.
One last question for you. It's a very important question.
Yes.
If you were to write another Star Wars story other than Rey,
Mm-hmm.
what character or characters would you want to write another story about?
Okay, I have two here. Number one would be Finn. I love Finn, love him so much. I know that's very on brand with the sequel trilogy, but like I just love that character so much, and I think there's so much to explore with him.
Mhm.
And a non-sequel trilogy character, I loved Rogue One. Rogue One was one of my favorite movies. I love Cassian
Yes,
Andor. I'm so excited for the show.
me too.
And if just the, like getting to write him and sort of explore, well, I know the show's about to explore what sort of his life before the Rogue One movie, but like a book about like his youth and growing up and like the sort of immoral things he did on the side of the rebels. Oh, I think I'm just thinking about that just makes me be like, yes, I want to read that. Someone, even if I can't write it, someone put that in my eyeballs, please.
We need it desperately. We need more Finn too, I think. We have not gotten enough Finn.
I know, right? And I'm just like just Finn, Poe, Ray. Like I'm really excited to see like what's happening with them in the future because I feel like there's so much fertile ground there with those three.
Definitely. Yeah, we need more books. We need more all the things, please. All right. Thank you so much for doing this. All these stories in this anthology were great, and to end on yours was just an absolute delight.
Thank you. Thank you. They actually didn't tell us the order. So like I think like right before we went to printing, we found out it was gonna be chronological order. And
Hmm.
so I was like, when I found out I was the last one, I'm like, oh gosh, I hope people like because it's like you gotta end with a bang, right? And so I was just like,
Yeah.
but people have been very excited. They're like, because as you mentioned before, there hasn't been a lot of Ray content yet.
Right.
People being like, oh, we're getting to the end and realizing it was Ray, they're so excited. And I think that excitement has just made it so worth it.
It definitely has. Yeah. Thank you so much for writing the things and for writing stories in general. They mean a lot to a lot of people. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you all for listening. Roseanne was so great to talk to, and I can tell you now, because it's already in my calendar, this is not the last Star Wars author you'll be hearing from on this show. So stay tuned for that. Stories of Jedi and Sith is available now wherever books are sold. Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network and is produced, written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez once again designed our podcast art. Keep up with the show on Twitter at Star Wars Lit Pod, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to tell everyone you know. I don't want your money, but I wouldn't mind a shout out. Special thanks to Roseanne A. Brown, Litsky PR, and Disney Lucasfilm Press for permission to repurpose this audio from the interview for this show. You can read a full transcript of the original interview where it was first published on Dork Side of the Force.